Hello again, and welcome to another video for our critical reasoning course. In this video, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about David Hume's problem of induction, as it also relates to his views on causation and this notion of necessary connections. So, just as a little bit of background, David Hume lived in the 18th century from 1711 to 1776. He was a Scottish philosopher who was working kind of along the same lines as other philosophers in the Enlightenment period. But specifically, David Hume was an empiricist. And so, by an empiricist, what we mean here is that Hume believed that knowledge comes through experience. Right, the origin of all of our knowledge is based upon our sense perceptions. Right, so right now I'm staring at a screen and a camera, and so my immediate sense perception is of the screen and the camera and the keyboard and the wall behind the screen and so forth, right? Those are the things that I'm immediately aware of. And so that's what my knowledge is based on. It's what I'm immediately aware of through sense perception. All knowledge comes to me this way. I have a kind of as John Locke would put it, a blank slate when I'm born, and then the slate gets filled up with information as I experience the world. So an empiricist is somebody who believes that knowledge comes through experience and through the observations that we make through our sense perceptions. And so that's the kind of epistemological view that David Hume is working with. But Hume is also kind of a skeptic in a lot of ways. Specifically, he's a skeptic with regard to induction. And remember, that's the topic for this module. And the previous module, we're looking at inductive reasoning. But he's a skeptic. He thinks that inductive knowledge, inductive reasoning, isn't really all that great. Indeed, it's not justified. It's not actually very rational. And so, in the sense in which he's a skeptic about induction, I want to kind of spell that out and unpack exactly what's going on, why he's a skeptic with regard to induction. And that's actually really quite important because so much of what we take ourselves to know, we know through experience. So much of what we take ourselves to understand, we gain through our sense perceptions. But there's other things that we take ourselves to know that we don't have through sense perception. For instance, I'm sitting on campus at UNL right now, and my daughter is probably just getting out of class at our high school. So I believe that my daughter is there, and that she's probably just now finishing up for the day. But I don't know that with any sort of absolute certainty. I'm not there. I don't see her. Nonetheless, I feel like I have pretty good reasons to believe that that's the case. But she could have like ditched class. She could have just, got in a car and drove away. Knock on wood or knock on something that didn't actually happen, right? But I trust that it didn't. Well, what justifies that belief of mine? What gives me reason to think that that belief is true? I notice that I'm not directly observing that right now, so that would be knowledge of something that is unobserved. And so it's based upon inductive reasoning, according to Hume. That kind of reasoning is unjustified. It's not rational. And so I want to unpack what's going on with this sort of skepticism. So Hume's problem of induction deals specifically with knowledge about unobserved events, whether that would be with regard to future events or current events that we're not currently perceiving, or even past events too. So take, for instance, our knowledge that dinosaurs once roamed the earth. That knowledge is based upon the fossil record and so forth, because we weren't actually there to, observe any dinosaurs. Likewise, our knowledge of how the Earth was formed. Obviously, nobody was around when the Earth was formed. The Earth was a big ball of fire for a very long time. So clearly, there was no life on the Earth at that point. So how do we know that that's how the Earth was formed? Well, this is based upon inductive reasoning where we're inferring certain things from other observations that we make. But they're not immediate observations, right? We're not immediately observing those events in the past. And when we make predictions about the future, when we claim that tomorrow is Saturday and my family is going to go to the farmer's market and we're going to spend some time hanging out together. Well, I believe this will happen, but it's not an event that has happened yet. It's a future event. So what justifies my knowledge that I'm going to be doing that tomorrow? It could turn out to be the case that there's like a nuclear war that occurs tonight. Again, knock on wood, let's hope that doesn't happen. But it's possible that it could happen, or the Earth could just like disappear and vanish. That's very unlikely, but it's not inconceivable. It's not beyond the possibility or the realm of imaginations, right? So what justifies my knowledge that I am going to go to the farmer's market tomorrow on Saturday? These are unobserved events, things that we are not immediately aware of. And notice that it looks like a lot of our scientific reasoning is of this sort. In fact, a lot of our daily knowledge is, or at least what we take ourselves to know, is of this sort. And so, if Hume's problem of induction goes through, if it really is as problematic as Hume seems to suggest, that this kind of knowledge is not real knowledge, it's not rational, it's not justified, well, then what does that say about our scientific reasoning? Our ability to know things about the future or unobserved events. Now, this involves what's called the principle of uniformity or the uniformity of nature. This principle says essentially that the future will be like the past, or the future will resemble the past. And we can extrapolate from this to say that everything that goes on in the universe is similar to what we have observed it to be like, both in the future as well as in the past. So as far as we know, we have this sort of assumption that we make that all of nature is uniform. It's like it is right now. It resembles what's happening right now. But according to Hume, this assumption is problematic. And notice that this assumption seems to be underlining all of our inductive reasoning, all of our inductive knowledge. And if it's problematic, then that's really, really terrible for all sorts of different things that we take ourselves to know or to be justified in believing. Since this assumption is underlining all of our inductive reasoning, if there's something wrong with the assumption, well, then that kind of destroys this kind of reasoning. Hence why Hume is a skeptic about induction. So, what is Hume's problem with this assumption about the uniformity of nature? Well, according to Hume, it's circular, right? When I want to try to show that this principle of the uniformity of nature, when I try to justify that principle and show why it's good, why I should accept it, it looks like I have to appeal to the principle of the uniformity of nature in order to do so. Take, for instance, this claim that says the sun will rise tomorrow. Well, that seems obvious. That seems true. But how do I know it's true? I haven't actually experienced tomorrow yet because tomorrow has not occurred. Well, the reason why I take myself to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow is because it arose today. The sun rose today, it rose yesterday. Now, of course, keep in mind here we're being metaphorical. Obviously, the sun doesn't rise, it just appears to rise, given the way that the earth rotates. But nonetheless, we can say that I believe the sun will rise tomorrow because it has every single day, as far as I can remember, I've experienced a sunrise in the morning, or I've experienced this idea of the sun rising. And therefore, I can infer from past experiences that this future experience will be similar. Well, what justifies that? It looks like the principle of uniformity of nature justifies that. But what justifies the principle of the uniformity of nature? It looks like the reason why we can use the principle of the uniformity of nature is because it's worked in the past. Every single time we've used the principle of the uniformity of nature in the past, it's worked. Therefore, in the future, when we use the principle of the uniformity of nature, it will also work. But that's circular. We're using the principle of the uniformity of nature to justify the use of the principle of the uniformity of nature, which is a problem. Hence, Hume is a skeptic about inductive reasoning in this regard. All of our inductive reasoning is unjustified and should be rejected as being irrational in some sense. Now, that's Hume on the problem of induction. And related, but not necessarily the same, but a very closely related issue is Hume's approach to causation and this notion of a necessary connection. And since this particular week we're talking about causal arguments and causal reasoning as it relates to inductive reasoning more generally, I want to spend some time talking about his skepticism in this regard too. So, of course, there's different interpretations of Hume, and not all philosophers agree on how exactly we should understand Hume here. But I think the general thought, at least the widely accepted view, is that Hume aims to give us some sort of an explanation for why we even have this idea or this belief about causation, cause and effect. Being some sort of a necessary connection. There's this next necessary sort of force or power that's going on with regard to cause and effect. Hume claims that all of our ideas and our beliefs must ultimately be derived from our impressions, our sense experiences, right? That's Hume's empiricism at work here, the epistemological approach to these issues. And so he has this question that guides our thoughts in this regard. Well, what is the origin of this idea? What's the origin of my belief about causation and necessary connections? The traditional view, or a pre-Humean take on causation, philosophers like Descartes or Locke or Aristotle, they would oftentimes assume that causation involves some sort of a real, metaphysically real connection or power that exists in nature. So take, for example, the example we used previously about playing a game of billiards and billiard balls. So if you hit the cue ball and the cue ball hits the eight ball and the eight ball goes into the corner pocket, that kind of cause and effect on this traditional approach, it seems to place some sort of metaphysical necessity, metaphysical like power that's involved there, where the cue hits the cue ball hits the eight ball gets sunk into the corner pocket, and there's like real effectual things happening there. There's a causal process that necessitates the effect, and Hume is challenging this. Hume is trying to show that we have no justification in this kind of causal belief, these sort of causal relations. And the reason why for Hume is based upon the fact that he's an empiricist. He thinks that all of our knowledge needs to come through our sense perception. And when we actually examine our sense perception, when we take a close look at what we actually perceive, we never actually perceive such powers. We never actually have any kind of phenomenological awareness of this metaphysical necessity or this real causal efficacious power that's happening in the world. All we ever see is the cue hitting the cue ball hitting the eight ball, and the eight ball going into the corner pocket. We never see causation itself. We just see these different events taking place in some sort of a structured manner. So Hume then makes this empirical observation. Hume claims that when we observe this sort of causal sequence, like the game of billiards, different balls striking each other, all we really ever perceive is contingency. We perceive events that are closely related to each other or that occur in space and time in a close proximity, temporally speaking, right, such that the cause precedes the effect. And this involves some sort of mental arrangement of what he calls constant conjunction. This is a kind of a mental event where we see these things happening over and over and over again through our experiences. And so we begin to expect it to happen over and over again every time we experience it in the future. Right? These sorts of events are the sort of things that happen all the time. Right? One event happens before the other event, and so we are mentally conjoining them together in this way, but we never actually perceive any sort of necessary connection between the cause and effect. Maybe the next time I play a game of billiards, when I hit the cue ball will just disappear, or maybe it will vanish, or maybe it will turn into water. Right? I mean, those things are at least possible. They're conceivable. I can imagine them happening. Right? So the reason why I don't think that they're going to happen is because I have so much background experience of it always happening in one way that I believe it's going to continue to happen in the future that way too. Right? This is the kind of constant conjunction that he says is a sort of a mental habit that we get ourselves into. Right, so Hume's skeptical conclusion here is that the idea of there being any sort of metaphysical necessity that's happening, what he calls necessary connections, does not actually come from our experience of the world. Rather, this is something that we project onto the world, but it's not real. There's no real actual necessary connections taking place. Experience only gives us regularity. Our experience with the world gives us this idea of constantly conjoining things together, but never actually establishes any sort of necessity happening in the world. So, for Hume, the notion that one event follows another event cannot actually be justified, rationally speaking, by observations. Still, Hume does offer some sort of what we might call a psychological solution. Right. This is more of an explanation for why we have this mental, conjoining things together, this habit of thought. So it's an explanation of that rather than actually giving some sort of a solution to the problem, even though we're calling it a psychological solution. Nonetheless, it's an explanation. Right. So here, what Hume does is he tries to point out that even if there is no rational justification, we can still try to make sense of it. Right. We have this sort of habit of thought, what Hume calls a custom, where our minds come to expect certain outcomes. And given that there's so much repeated experience of this constant conjunction, then we form the idea of necessity. We form this idea of necessary connections or a metaphysically real necessary thing that's happening in the world, even though there isn't that thing there at all. Right? We're sort of projecting it onto the world based upon the fact that we've got this psychological thing happening to us, a custom of or a habit of mind, as you will. The feeling of expectation or the transition that we make in our minds gives rise to this idea, these beliefs about causal powers and necessary connections, even though those aren't real. And so we can have some sort of psychological explanation, even if there's no rational justification. And at the bottom of the handout here, hopefully you can see this all right. I've given you a quote from Hume where he says, "Necessity is nothing but the determination of the mind to carry out thoughts from one object to another." There's no real metaphysical necessity, according to Hume. This is just our minds sort of seeking patterns and finding patterns where there are none. So I wanted to kind of go over this information to have a good idea, a good historical sense of how an empiricist approaches this. Empiricist like Hume approaches this issue of induction and causal arguments from a very skeptical point of view. I'm also going to include a couple more videos that goes through this information in a little more detail that will help clarify some of the points that I made here. And that's what we'll do next.